Quite likely is one of the things they're looking at most closely, and that's the reason for the search this morning. But as far as the program is concerned, which is the big feature, first they'll have to figure it out, and then they'll have to figure out what needs to be done about it. In this case, it happened so fast that the astronauts couldn't even push their panic button, the button that would have separated the spacecraft from that booster. There was no time for anything. It just happened, Bob.
Roy, if you remember, as you well do, 20 years ago, almost 2 decades ago, when the Apollo fire occurred, it was 21 months before there was another manned space flight. Do you expect something like that to occur now?
I don't think it'll take that long this time. In that case, the cause of the fire was something that was a total design failure. The spacecraft had to be totally redesigned. In this case, you have the record of 24 successful missions before disaster struck. So I don't think this will be quite that sweeping a change required. But until they figure it out, who are we to second-guess them?
All right, Roy Neal, thank you very much. In other news this morning, actress Lily Palmer has died at the age of 71. Palmer, best known for films like Body and Soul and Counterfeit Trader, died of a heart attack at her home in Los Angeles. It's 7:07. Jane?
And thank you, Bob. Willard Scott is here with the weather. I'm struck at a morning like this, or after a day like yesterday, when we're all united as a community around our TVs, sharing that sense that the nation is we're all thinking about the same things at the same time.
It is an incredible emotion. I was thinking, you know, you try to come up with a word, because obviously you want to say something to let people know we care, because we all do. I mean, tears are one thing, but it's almost a new meaning to the word tragedy when you see, as you did on television yesterday, the families of those, the astronauts and the private civilian that was involved in this, and our hearts go out. We can say no more than that, but we all, as you say, Jane, share in the love and affection and just the sorrow of this, because it's such a terrible, terrible
Even as
thing.
we all go about the business at hand, which we all will do today.
We continue on, and we do have our little weather forecast for you this morning. We had some contrast in temperatures yesterday. For instance, Miami was 38. That was a record low. Mobile, Alabama was 18. Sault Ste. Marie was 28 below zero yesterday. Record warm weather, Dodge City, Kansas, 73. Albuquerque was 64 degrees. Yuma, Arizona was 84. The big weather story this morning is snow travel. Chicago, Louisville, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Washington, New York, all 2 to 4 inches of snow today. Low pressure centered around the Great Lakes is moving towards the northeast, and with it some snow. The jet stream reveals how temperatures are considerably warmer in the western states, but much, much colder down in Old Dixie. Now, we do have another Arctic blast coming in across Minnesota and Wisconsin this morning. As you can see, Minneapolis-St. Paul is going to get up to about 9 degrees, and that will be it. So this cold air will again move down into the nation's midsection. There'll be a little bit of a warming trend. Atlanta's going to get up to 54. Miami will get up to 64 degrees today, and we'll have some sunshine. But just about the Carolina-Virginia border on up, expect some snow back down through the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, the Great Smokies. Another weather system out west producing rain from about Eureka, California, north of Seattle, some snow in the Cascades and the Sierra Nevada range, and absolutely delightful from San Diego right on across to Roswell, New Mexico, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Here's what's happening in your world right now.
Good morning. I'm meteorologist Ken Phillips. Watch for some light snow at times today, with temperatures turning a bit warmer, the high near 30. Sunshine will be brighter tomorrow with a high near 35.
Los Angeles, California can expect some snow, or not some snow, but some rain later on this afternoon. Generally speaking, this morning a little bit on the cloudy side in Southern California, except for San Diego, which will be lovely. A birthday wish this morning, Margaret Pete of Norwalk, Connecticut, is 100 years old. We wish her a very happy birthday. Now here's Jane.
Thank you, Willard. In a moment, we'll be talking to some friends of Krista McAuliffe from her hometown. But first, this is Today on NBC.
We'll be going up to Concord, New Hampshire shortly for those interviews. When Krista McAuliffe first learned that she was to be the first teacher in space, she really couldn't quite believe it. Last July, when she found out that she'd won, she discussed her excitement with Brian Gumbel.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Simple question. Why you?
It's really hard to say. There were 10 people. We were such a cohesive group, enthusiastic, really enjoying teaching, and I think any one of us would have done a really good job. I don't know what put me over the top, and I'm delighted to be here.
When you first applied for this, did you think you had even a prayer?
I really didn't. I was almost doing it kind of like when you play the lottery. If you don't play it, you don't win.
Sure.
And when I filled out that application, that's really how I felt. I figured there'd be at least 50,000 people across the country who would be slipping that into the mailbox around the same time.
What about when you made it down to the last 10? Did you think then, maybe?
Well, then the possibility became very real, and I really started to think what the impact would be on my teaching career and on my family.
Yeah.
But it was still really exciting.
Has it all hit you yet?
No, I don't think so. I still can't believe that I'm going to actually be going into that shuttle. It just really doesn't seem possible. Maybe when I'm on the launch pad it will.
What are you most excited about?
Seeing the Earth from that perspective of that small planet, you know, it's such a big place here, but being able to look at it from a new perspective, and I hope I can bring that wonder and that excitement back to the students.
Maybe just a little bit of fright, too?
Not yet. Maybe when I'm strapped in and those rockets are going off underneath me, there will be, but space flight today really seems safe. We had a good example of that when NASA shut down the last one through the computer because one of the backup systems wasn't working.
You say it seems safe. A lot of people equate that with it also seems boring. Have you been one, have you been one who followed NASA efforts all along, long before?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I can remember watching the Vanguards as they went like this, and I remember Alan Shepard's first suborbital flight, and it was really thrilling.
I read where you said you wanted to demystify space. In plain talk, what does that mean?
Well, we see the space program as a science or math or technological adventure right now. I want the students to get a little bit of ownership. I want them to feel that they're part of the space age because they're the future and their children or grandchildren are going to be pioneering that. So I really hope to bring an ordinary person's perspective to this.
Have you heard from some of your students yet?
Yes, I have. They've been dropping by the house, they've been sending me cards, they've been calling. That's been super.
NASA, of course, has a selfish interest in all this. I mean, they want to build up public support for the huge outlays that are necessary to keep the program going. As part and parcel of being the first ordinary citizen, I mean, are you expected to be the ordinary speaker who's out there making speeches on NASA's behalf?
That's going to come. Certainly will, but I'm also delighted that the teaching profession and students and the whole country is really going to benefit from this. We hopefully are going to know an awful lot more about what life is like aboard the shuttle.
Yeah. You go up on January the 22nd.
That's what the date is, yes,
of 86, and we're hoping that that'll be met. What are you most concerned about between now and then?
Well, probably just getting my life in order. I do have a family in Concord, New Hampshire, and I have to get them set. I also want to make sure my replacement in school is going to be comfortable for next year.
Any thoughts, however slight, that you might not measure up once it gets going?
Well, one of the things that has been really surprising is all of the publicity, and I was saying to my husband the other night, it's almost like I'm reading about somebody else, you know?
Well, it's a dream come true for you.
Oh, it certainly is.
That interview seen here on Today last July. In just a minute, we'll go up to Concord, New Hampshire to talk with some of Krista's friends. Right now, this is Today on NBC.
And, of course, any death of an American astronaut is going to hit all of us hard, but in this case, maybe it hurts a little more because one of the people who died was one of us, a civilian. The teacher astronaut, Krista McAuliffe, lived in Concord, New Hampshire. And we go now to St. Peter's Church in Concord as three people who knew Krista McAuliffe very well join us. The pastor of the church she attended, Father Chester Moroka of St. Peter's Church, her next-door neighbor, Ginny Timmons, and a family friend, Pam Tarbell. Thank you all for being with us. And I should say at the outset that we do have some audio difficulties this morning. I think we would be able to hear you well enough. We'll try. Father Chester, your parishioners must be turning to you with the unanswerable question, why does such a thing happen to such a good person? What do you say? Father, I'm afraid I was unable to hear your remarks. Your microphone evidently is not working. Ginny or Pam? Pam, I understand your son Miles was little Scotty McAuliffe's best friend. Does Miles comprehend any of this? No, we're striking out here too in audio. I think maybe we should just try to repatch this and and come back a little later. Where's John Palmer? If John could come join me, we'll try to get back to Concord, New Hampshire. Meanwhile, Steve Delaney is still down at Cape Canaveral this morning. Steve, what does the Cape look like on the morning after?
Jane, it looks
Steve
pretty
Delaney?
bleak. Yes, Jane, I can hear you. It looks pretty bleak down here right now. As you might imagine, in the wake of such a thing as happened yesterday, those members of the news corps who were not... I'm sorry, I'm responsible for that problem. I had it in my pocket trying to keep warm. It is cold down here, Jane, and fairly bleak. Those members of the press corps who were not here yesterday morning showed up in droves yesterday afternoon. I think one of the ways that we can look at what happened yesterday from now on in an attempt to understand how they're going about the investigation is to consider what happens when there is a plane crash, which happens all too often. The National Transportation Safety Board goes at it in several directions, one of which is to try to put together the pieces of the wreckage. There aren't many pieces, but the search for them goes on and continued through the night last night.
Steve, I'm going to interrupt you just now, and we will get back to you for more of your report, but I understand we do have Concord back, I'm hoping,
Okay.
in which case I can reintroduce Father Moroka, a neighbor and a family friend of Krista McAuliffe. Father Chester Moroka, what I was asking was, when your parishioners come to you for the answer to the question, why does such a thing happen to such a good person as Krista, what do you say?
Well, we don't have an answer for that, Jane. We simply try to be supportive. As we mentioned last night at our service, we simply see the value of her work, of her contribution to this program, and the example that she's been to the nation, especially to the young people. Other than that, we simply try to be supportive.
Ginny Timmons, you're the next door neighbor. You have 8 children, I understand. One of your daughters has an autographed picture of Krista. What did Krista say in that autograph?
Well, I brought the picture with me, Jane, just because the picture bespeaks Krista's charisma that all of us felt. Our daughter is a freshman and received this as a high schooler, but I think any of us on reading it could identify as well.
And what does she say?
In it, she speaks of, to Jean, may your future be limited only by your dreams. Love, Krista.
Well, what about the dreams of a young woman? Are they going to be traumatized by the loss?
I'm sure for everyone, they're devastated, but it's a temporary devastation. I think all of us, as I say, I readily identify not only with what has happened to Krista, but to her families and the other astronauts and their families.
Pam, you have known Krista for a long time as a dear family friend. We know, obviously, she was a devoted teacher, a modern working mother, but she was more than that to her family, obviously. How did she do it all, in the phrase of the day?
She had lots of energy, and what you saw her on television through the media is how she acted all the time. She was an excellent mother. She spent lots of time with her children, taking them all over the place, doing the things that all the mothers do. It was hard for her, I think, to leave her children and go back to school, but she was so dedicated about teaching that she was able to combine the two, and she had lots of support from her husband, Steve, and from the people around her, and she was able to carry it off.
Ginny, everybody's so concerned about Steve and the little kids. You watched them next door the last 4 months without Mom. They doing okay?
Right. Well, I think one of the nice things, Mrs. Pauley, is that Steve is such a loving person, and he readily took on the role of both parents when Krista left.
Thank you to all of you. I'm going to have to interrupt. You've been champs through this. A station break.
Thank you, Jane.
We're back at 7:30. I'm Jane Pauley here with John Palmer while Brant Gumbel is off this week. And as we continue in this half hour with our assessment of the Challenger tragedy, we'll be going to Washington to talk to Senator Jake Garn. He has flown a space shuttle mission, and among those who died were men and women he counts as personal friends. We'll also talk to Senator Pete Domenici, a member of the subcommittee that appropriates funds for the space program.
And we'll also hear from 2 former astronauts who themselves experienced frightening emergencies in outer space, David Scott and Alan Bean. Bean, by the way, also was involved in the training of 5 of those who were lost aboard the Challenger.
And we'll also meet 14-year-old Peter Billingsley. He's the national spokesman for the Young Astronauts program, and he was at the Cape yesterday watching that liftoff. But first at the news desk, here's Bob Jameson.
Jane, there are no firm answers this morning to the question of why the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up little more than a minute after it was launched from Cape Canaveral. All 7 astronauts were killed. Today, a search is on in the Atlantic for any debris that might provide a clue as to what went wrong. Steve Delaney is standing by with a report from Cape Canaveral. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Bob. Actually, the search has been going on since right after the disaster yesterday. It has simply intensified since we have daylight, but it went on through the night and will continue until they're convinced they can't find anything else. Ships have been doing most of the heavy work during the night because they can get down closer to the water, and they have electromagnetic devices which can kind of try to pinpoint where there are larger pieces. So far, most of what's been found is quite small. 2 feet by 5 feet has been recovered but has not been identified. With the coming of daylight, it will be possible to use aircraft once again and to get broader spanses of the ocean covered. The area is several hundred square miles. It's centered about 30 miles off the coast. Now, whatever's on the bottom is going to be very hard to discover because it's in the edge of the Gulf Stream. The bottom is sloping off toward the edge of the continental shelf. And because the water is of different temperatures out there, it's fairly turbid and is going to yield evidence rather slowly, Bob, and answers even more reluctantly.
Steve, thank you. Krista McAuliffe, the enthusiastic, outgoing teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, lost her life as her family and others from her hometown looked on from the ground. Dennis Murphy reports.
NASA gave the good seats to the kids from Concord, the bleachers just opposite the shuttle.
I'm nervous for her, and I'm really proud of her.
Krista McAuliffe, their teacher, was on the spaceship. The kids huddled in the cold grandstand right behind their teacher's mother, father, and sister. The moment had arrived. At first, it was hard to tell what happened. The third graders who go to school with Krista's boy were led away. Something had gone terribly wrong. Smoke in the sky, confusion. The wonderful adventure ended before it began.
I'd like to say something in particular, something special to the school children of our nation, and especially those from Concord. You must try to understand that spirit, bravery, and commitment are what make not only the space program, but all of life worthwhile. We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
The kids flew home last night. Dennis Murphy, NBC News, the Kennedy Space Center.
Actress Lily Palmer has died after a heart attack. She was 71 years old. There's other news this morning. In the Middle East, Israeli warplanes attacked 3 Palestinian guerrilla camps near Sidon, Lebanon. There are reports that 1 man was killed and 6 injured. And the Bank of Japan today cut its key interest rate by ½ percentage point, leading to speculation that interest rates may fall further in this country. It's 7:34, Jane.
Thank you, Bob. Willard will have the weather for us in just a moment. And then we'll talk to Peter Billingsley. You may recall him from the TV show Real People, where he was watching the Challenger launch yesterday with some of Krista McAuliffe's students. First, these messages. And for a Wednesday morning look at the weather, here's Willard.
Hey, Jane, good morning to you and good morning, everybody. I got a great piece of very optimistic news here for anybody that's in the reporting business. Jane, catch this. Margaret Moore of B County, Texas, is 100 years old today. She is the oldest living reporter. She started work for the Beeville Bee-Picayune in 1895, and she still writes for the paper. She's thinking of maybe retiring after her birthday today. I hope not, Ethel. Hang in there. Ethel Pinkston of Seattle, Washington is 100. She worked until she was 84, and she said, I think I'll take it easy. Little gooey duck soup. Look out, Boston. If you're in Detroit, if you're in Cleveland, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, I could always get a job with Amtrak this morning because these are the cities that are expecting some snow. 2 to 4 inches of it. This is what you call our big weather story of the day. And this snow will be from just about Washington, D.C., maybe Richmond, Virginia on up 2 to 4 inches. The southern states are considerably milder today than they were yesterday after some record lows. Miami's going to be 64 and mostly sunny. Look at Dallas-Fort Worth, 70. The southern plains, same thing, except a new blast of Arctic air moving down in from the northern plains and upper Mississippi. Warm all across the southern tier of states, but rain in the northwest. From about Eureka, California, north to Seattle, snow in the mountains. Light snow. Here's what's happening in your world this morning.
Good morning. This is meteorologist Ken Phillips. We'll be a little warmer today with some light snow in a few places. The high near 30. Lots of sunshine and 35 tomorrow.
That's it for right now. 7:37. Here's Shane.
Thank you, Willard. The picture of the Challenger space shuttle exploding will remain in the national consciousness for so long. But for those who watched the launch and the tragedy from the grandstands at the Cape, the experience and the shock will be indelible. Among those in the grandstand were the parents of teacher Krista McAuliffe, who chose to watch the launch with students from their daughter's New Hampshire school, actually the classmates of her son, little Scott. And Peter Billingsley was there, the national spokesman for the Young Astronauts program. And Peter joins us this morning from his hometown of Phoenix and our NBC affiliate there, KPNX TV. And welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Peter, would you explain how it came to pass that you were there at the launch yesterday?
Well, I was invited as a guest of the Young Astronauts program. I was there to host some pre-launch parties, and we were waiting for the launch. It was first scheduled for the 22nd, but then it kept on being moved up, and then finally on that day we saw it.
Had you ever seen a launch before?
Only on the news. This was my first one that I've ever seen up close.
So you would have no way of knowing as you watched clear the tower and disappear in the sky, as I've seen it do, that something might have gone wrong, or did you sense that something was wrong?
It looked all fine. It was going up straight. I thought that everything was great. I guess some people had thought later that it took a slower liftoff than it should have, but I didn't really know that because this was my first time. I saw it lift off, then I could see the trail going down, then I saw a big round cloud of smoke, which I guess was where it flew up, and I wasn't really sure what that was. I thought that maybe it was the solid rocket boosters leaving because I didn't really know. But then I saw this thing that was twisting and was moving, and at that point, I knew that something was wrong. But the only thing was that the people that knew that something was wrong were in so much shock that they didn't scream or anything. They just were silent.
What was your first confirmation that something had gone terribly wrong?
Okay, we were all cheering and screaming. Then there was a microphone that was right out in front of us, and we could make out the word malfunction. And with that, everybody started to be quiet. There were still some other people. Then we heard the words, "The vehicle has exploded." And with that, everybody went into
Peter,
trauma.
who was there? The parents were there. There were a lot of little kids,
yes.
Much younger than you. Was there anybody there to look after them?
Yes, there were. There were some of the kids' mothers that were there. Just everybody was in a huge state of shock. They were all in panic, and it was just an awful, awful thing.
Now, you as a spokesman for the Young Astronauts program,
yes, I am.
Did that mean that you wanted to grow up and be an astronaut yourself?
It doesn't really mean that I want to grow up and be an astronaut. It's just what the Young Astronauts program is it's an educational program that's backed by the president, and it's geared towards kids from 6 to 16, and it's mainly to prepare them for the 21st for life in the 21st century, because with everything growing so fast now that we want to be ready for that time.
Do you still want to be ready, or did the shock and the trauma yesterday change your mind somehow?
No, I think that even though it's an awful thing, like President Reagan said, we've got to keep going. We've got to keep moving with full force. I think we should find out what happened wrong, and possibly today's young astronauts can possibly make a fuel tank that would be less prone to blowing up, or could make a possible escape hatch on the shuttle.
Do you feel your job as a spokesman for the Young Astronauts program is all the more important today?
I don't know. I wouldn't say it's all the more important. It is probably a little bit more important, but right now we just want to heighten the awareness of people that in this country right now the academic standards are very low compared to Russia and Germany and Japan and all these other places.
Astronauts have to be pretty brave people, don't they?
Yes, yes they do.
Well, Peter, thank you for being with us, and I guess we certainly know now that there is absolutely a frontier out there yet to be conquered by your generation.
Yes,
Thanks,
there
Peter.
is.
We'll
Thank
be
you.
back in a moment with two former astronauts who survived harrowing experiences in space after these messages.
We continue this morning's special coverage with two former astronauts, both of whom had close calls in space. Alan Bean, crew member aboard Apollo 12, was the fourth man to walk on the moon and the commander of Skylab 2. He also was in charge of basic training for 5 of those who were lost aboard the Challenger. He joins us now from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And here in our New York studio, David Scott, a crewman aboard Gemini 8, Apollo 9, and commander of Apollo 15. He remains a leading authority on booster engines. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
First, I'd like to go to you, Alan, down in Houston. Tell us about your problem you had on the Skylab 2. That was quite a scare, wasn't it?
Well, we had a problem on Skylab 2 where we lost some thrusters during the rendezvous, and then it wasn't so scary as it was mystifying. When something goes wrong and lights light up, you sort of are concerned about what's happening, and you don't really know for sure.
And on Apollo 12, you were hit by lightning, were you not?
Yes, that was even more amazing. I was sitting in the right seat, and this was about 50 seconds after launch. Lightning struck our spacecraft. We didn't know that at the time. The indication we got was about 15 warning lights coming on, and at that moment there's a lot of noise, a lot of vibration, just like the shuttle during launch. And when those lights came on, it took me a good 5 seconds to finally convince myself that the lights were really on and we really had a problem. Of course, yesterday they probably didn't have any warning lights, and they certainly didn't have 5 seconds to think about it.
David, you had a problem on Gemini 8, what your spacecraft was tumbling, the capsule.
Yes. Well, it was similar to what Alan said. It's a surprise. You see the indications, you take corrective action, and most of the time in flight it's almost automatic because of the intense training and the preparation that you have before you go.
David, you're an expert on the booster situation. All the attention now seems to be focused pretty much on that main tank, fuel tank. Do you think that's where the problem was?
Well, it's hard to say, John. I think we can't speculate until NASA's had an opportunity to review all the data and reach a conclusion of its own. NASA's a very good detective. I think they'll be able to sift out the data, especially since we've had 24 successful flights and we know what's going on with the shuttle. And as a matter of fact, my company's developing a small upper stage booster rocket based on the shuttle technology, and we feel very comfortable that the shuttle and its technology is a very safe system.
Alan, as we mentioned at the beginning, you were in charge of helping to train 5 of the astronauts. You have some pretty special memories this morning, I would assume.
I certainly do. When I heard that the shuttle had a disaster, I, of course, turned in television and followed it, and then they showed the pictures on television of the crew members, and the 5 professional crew members were ones that were the first astronaut candidate class that we had back in 1978, and I trained most of them. I have good memories about all of them. One of my favorite remembrances was of Judy Resnick. We had taken all the candidates down to Key West to undergo some parachute training and some water training, and there were 50 people in this boat where we were teaching them how to survive in case they went in the water in their parachute. There was only about 15 astronauts. The rest were Navy and Air Force pilots. And one of the procedures was that you need to learn is the boat gets going about 20 knots and drops the person, in this case Judy Resnick, in the water, and she's being towed behind the boat, and you've got to figure a way to come up and not be swallowing water and turn over on your back and release your parachute harnesses. And that day, if you don't do it right, by the way, and I didn't do it right when I did it long years ago and had to do it again, on that vessel there were only 2 people out of the 50 that did it right the first time, and Judy Resnick was one of them. And so I had a fine memory that moment when that occurred, and I've thought about that many times, about women in space, and Judy Resnick particularly.
David, what does all this mean, this tragedy of yesterday, mean to the future of the space program? Big setback?
Well, I think it's a temporary setback. It is indeed a big setback. It's a tragedy. But I believe we'll proceed on. We'll be able to sift out the data, find the problem. And as you know, we're opening the frontiers of space. We're beginning to develop commerce. And I think the country is going in a very positive fashion. We just have to fall back, regroup, and then proceed on again.
Do you have any problem with the idea of moving toward civilians in space, as we did this time with a school teacher, talk now of a journalist, whenever the next shuttle flight might be?
Oh, no, I believe we have to do that, and I believe they want to do that. I believe Krista, a very intelligent woman, understood what she was doing, and she went out to the frontier. As I think she said in one of her interviews, if you don't play, you don't win.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this morning. Next, we'll go to Washington to hear from two senators with a special interest in what happened at the Cape and in the future of the space program. First, now, let's take a station break.
Two members of the U.S. Senate with special interest in the space program are with us this morning from our Washington studio. New Mexico Republican Pete Domenici is chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, and both he and Republican Jake Garn of Utah are on the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees NASA's budget. But perhaps Jake Garn is best known as the senator who took a shuttle flight in outer space in April of last year. Senator Garn, the personal was paramount for you on yesterday. Has 24 hours changed your perspective at all?
No, it hasn't, Jane. It's been an extremely sad time for me. Visiting with the families last night was very difficult because it's so impossible to feel adequate in what to say to comfort them. But I suppose the thing that was most touching was Mrs. Scobie standing up as the Vice President and Senator John Glenn and I walked into the room in the crew quarters at Cape Canaveral. She said, "Mr. Vice President and Senators, I want you to know that I speak for all of the families. We want the space program to continue. Despite today's tragedy, we don't want it slowed down, we don't want it stopped, and we know that our loved ones would feel exactly the same way. So the program should continue. This is a great tragedy. Shame that it happened, but it should not deter us from our great exploration of space."
Should Mrs. Scobie be concerned that that might not happen?
Well, I don't think so. I think Congress is much more aware of the values of the space program and all of the spin-offs that help every human being on the face of this earth every day, and products and technologies that we have gained from space exploration. So I don't think that's going to happen. There will always be some naysayers and some negative people who would say that, but if we were going to stop this because of this accident, if you look back in the past in a lot of different scientific endeavors, we didn't stop them because we had some temporary setbacks.
Senator Domenici, I'm going to guess that the naysayers on Capitol Hill are a little underground at this point. Would it be unseemly to criticize NASA at this point in our national grief?
Oh, I'm sure they will be back above ground, as Senator Garn indicated. They're probably hid out for the time being. But, you know, there were naysayers even when we didn't have budget problems. There were people who thought we ought to do it another way. They didn't like manned space flights. They wanted to cut back on this program 8 or 9 years ago when I first got involved. So they'll still be around, but let me say there's nothing that makes American people more proud than when we accomplish great things, when we're on the cutting edge. And this has been a tragedy, but I think it may work in reverse. I think there may be more support rather than less for this magnificent program because of this tragedy.
Well, there may be some double meaning in that cutting edge phrase that you used. Budget cuts were inevitable, and now with just the dollar loss and losing a quarter of the space shuttle program, the loss of the orbiter, the time that's going to be lost, you're going to give NASA more money than you had anticipated because of this loss?
Well, let me just put it this way. I'm positive that the United States Congress is going to find a way to continue this program. I can't give exact dollar figures at this moment, but I'm convinced that this is the kind of program that has so many benefits for mankind and for America as the world's leader in so many respects that we're going to see it through.
But would you take advantage of this tragic turning point to do some course correcting?
Well, frankly, I have always been one that listens to the experts and weighs the pros and cons. I don't try to put myself in their shoes, so I think we'll listen to them again, and perhaps some correcting has to be done. But from my standpoint, we had refined shuttle and reduced it to a minimum size for its effectiveness, and we ought to continue and see it through.
Senator Garn, what about you? Would there be any course correcting that you would take advantage of in this time of assessment or reassessment?
Well, Jane, I think we have to realize that we've had 25 years of space flight, 55 missions without an accident in the air at all. I think we need to look at the positive side and what a remarkably safe program this has been. The course correction that needs to be maintained or found out at this point and accomplished is we need to know exactly what caused this accident. And as soon as we have determined that and fixed what the problem was so that it won't happen again, then we will continue. So the course correction is a delay while we regroup, find out why this tragedy occurred, and then move on in this great exploration of space.
I'm going to ask you to make a guess, but in both of your cases, it's an educated guess. How soon will Americans be in space again?
Well, it's hard to guess because there's so little information available right now. It could be a matter of just a few weeks. It could be several months.
I agree.
All right. Senator Domenici, Senator Garn, thank you again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we'll be back after these messages. If you have never seen it, the launch of a space shuttle is frightening, it's thunderous, it's awe-inspiring to see when it turns out right. We're going to show you this split-screen version of the launch of the Columbia on January 12th, the successful launch. And next to it on the left is the launch yesterday, the disastrous launch of the Challenger. And they are set time to time.
Throttle down to 65% shortly. Roger, we copy. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engine still running smoothly at 85. Now stepping down to 67%. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%. Challenger, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up. Pressure in the vehicle. 1 minute 15 seconds.
We're back at 8 o'clock on this somber Wednesday morning, the 29th of January, 1986. It has been only 25 years since the first man rocketed into outer space, a brief moment, really. But as President Reagan said yesterday, it has been a time of dazzling accomplishment that leaves us taking wonders for granted. Well, now suddenly there's been a tragic accounting and serious questions about how our space program should proceed, and we'll discuss some of those questions in this hour. And welcome back to a second hour of Today and our special coverage of the Challenger tragedy. I'm Jane Pauley. Brant Gumbel is on vacation this week. John Palmer has moved over from the news desk. John?
And Jane, later in this hour, we'll talk with a child psychologist with some advice for parents whose children are among those affected by the tragedy at the Cape. And Mike Leonard reports from Concord, New Hampshire, a little town this morning facing up to the painful fact that its favorite school teacher won't be coming back from her field trip to outer space.
But let's get the hour started at the news desk this morning. Bob Jameson.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning. Ships, planes, and helicopters.
Some of Challenger's debris has been recovered, and ships and planes are combing the Atlantic for still more clues. But the final determination is expected to depend primarily on that technical data now being analyzed in Houston. Al Dale looks back now at yesterday's launch and its tragic aftermath.
This was the 4th try for the 25th shuttle mission, but spirits were high as the 7 crew members, including schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, went to the launch pad and prepared for liftoff. The countdown went smoothly.
We have main engine start, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Liftoff was picture perfect for the first minute. Family members, including the parents of the first teacher on a shuttle mission, looked skyward as Challenger soared towards space. Then the horror that would transform the day from one of joy and hope to one of despair.
15 seconds, velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude.
The normally confident voice of Houston Control became noticeably affected.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
It took a while for the reality to sink in. Faces told the story. Vice President Bush arrived at the Cape, accompanied by 2 senator astronauts.
The President and I and the entire nation join in mourning the 7 splendid men and women who now rest in God's arms.
As one of the people who's been here all day with some of the families that told us coming in a few moments ago when he was talking to the families earlier, several of them said to him, "Don't let this slow the program down."
And here you see this morning from the Cape, ships going out into the area where the shuttle went off yesterday, searching.
That report from correspondent Al Dale at Cape Canaveral this morning. 4 of the 7 crew members who died were on their second shuttle missions, among them spacecraft commander Dick Scobie, mission specialist Ronald McNair, the second black in space on his second mission. So was mission specialist Judith Resnick, the second woman in space. And aerospace engineer Ellison Onizuka had flown on the shuttle's first secret mission, he also the first Japanese American in space. Aeronautical engineer Michael Smith, the pilot, although on his first mission, electrical engineer Gregory Jarvis on his first shuttle flight, and of course, best known, Krista McAuliffe, who was to have become the first teacher in space. As experts try to determine what went wrong, Lynn Scher reviews the now painfully familiar television tape for clues to the tragedy.
As Challenger climbed into the sky, it looked normal. Pretty as a picture, observers said, textbook perfect. And then, perhaps the first sign of disaster. An orange flame where the big fuel tank is connected to the shuttle and where its fuel lines feed into the 3 main engines. At the left, a plume indicating gases from the tank supply of liquid hydrogen and oxygen. More food for the fire. Within seconds, the flame jumps upward, the source of the catastrophic explosion. It is an immense fireball igniting yet another explosion at the top of the external tank, and it consumes the shuttle. Then, for a moment, from out of the smoke, we appear to see the top of the shuttle Challenger emerging briefly. Our last view of the now ruined spacecraft before it falls to the sea with its very precious cargo. Finally, a view of one of the solid rocket boosters, still burning but on a cockeyed path, separated prematurely from the shuttle on its way to the ocean. That, at least, is what we can see from the tapes. But the pictures are just one of the tools NASA will use to try to determine the cause of the explosion. They'll also look at the data transmitted during the liftoff sequence. They'll examine the bits and pieces of material retrieved from the ocean. And they can only hope that all of those sources will, in fact, lead to the answer. How did it happen? Lynn Scher, ABC News, Los Angeles.
President Reagan called the death of the 7 crew members a national loss. And in Krista McAuliffe's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, friends and relatives gathered last night to say goodbye. McAuliffe's student said her death had made them feel as if a part of them had died. This morning, Concord High School has canceled classes so that professional counselors can talk to students about their loss. John McKenzie standing by in Concord this morning. John?
Steve, I think it was difficult for any of us to watch what happened yesterday, to see the spacecraft and the 7 people on board blow apart. There are many questions to be answered, but among them, what impact the sight of that will have on the children who are watching it live on television, and in particular, the school children here at Concord High School. Krista McAuliffe taught here for 3 years, taught economics and history and law. She made the children here such an important part of her life. They were involved in virtually everything she did. She got into the space program in large part for them. She said she wanted to demystify space. And last night, Governor John Sununu said he hoped what would happen yesterday and the sight of it will not traumatize these students.
What about the help that they're going to get today? Just exactly what's being done?
Well, the classes are canceled here today, but the doors will remain open to allow the students and the teachers to continue to grieve together if they wish. They're also bringing in professional guidance counselors to talk to the students. They say it's important at this stage that the students feel free to articulate their fears, to ask questions, even though no one has any answers.
John McKenzie in Concord, thank you very much. Briefly now, other news this morning. Temperatures in Florida did not drop as much as feared yesterday, sparing citrus growers another deep freeze. Killer freezes, you'll recall, over the past 2 years have cost Florida growers $3 billion. And there's been another spy arrest in this country. Airman First Class Bruce Ott charged with trying to pass intelligence to the Soviet Union. Ott working at the aviation wing in California that operates super-secret SR-71 spy planes. And that's our news at 8. Joan?
Thank you, Stephen. Right now to 7 minutes after 8 and time for the weather. And Dave Murray, what's it look like?
Well, we've got another mixed bag today. We've got plenty of clouds as we look at the view from the weather satellite this morning. Clouds from two storm systems. One is starting to push into the west coast this morning, the other moving into the Ohio Valley. This is a small Alberta clipper that will quickly push to the east with gusty winds and a pocket of about 1 to 3 inch snow, though I think heavier snow is going to fall across eastern portions of New England during the night tonight. Out west, the storm is going to fizzle rather quickly as it comes up over the mountains, but a new Alberta clipper is going to pull together in the plains. It's going to reinforce the cold and the snow for the northern plains. At the same time, most of the east coast will clear out. That's a look at the national weather. Now here's what you can expect.
After an overnight low of 14 degrees, we're looking for a high today in the mid to upper 20s. Skies will be cloudy, and we have a chance for getting about an inch of snow. Then overnight, that snow will end. It'll be kind of cold, mid-teens to near 20. Tomorrow, clearing up low to mid-30s.
That's our weather report. Have a safe Wednesday. David?
Thank you, Dave. 9 minutes after 8 right now. Gene Cernan, longtime astronaut, many exciting missions into space. He was the last American, the last person to be on the moon back in 1972, and he's helping us look at yesterday's shuttle disaster this morning. He's at KTRK in Houston. Hi, Gene.
Good morning, David.
Gene, there was a headline in a New York newspaper this morning, in the New York Daily News, as a matter of fact, that said, and I'm quoting, the shuttle, quote, the shuttle looks like a lemon, unquote. What's your reaction to hearing that quote, or if you were to read the quote?
Well, I hadn't heard it until just this moment, but it's obviously very short-sighted. The triumph, the accomplishments that the shuttle has brought this nation and the people of it that are to a great degree yet unrealized, phenomenal. I don't know how anyone can print. I'm not even sure that that's newsworthy.
Gene, there seem to have been a lot of contradictory messages being sent by the media, by industry, by NASA, by everybody involved who participates in all this. On one hand, that, you know, the launches, it's become routine, we're used to the great success, to the fact that, you know, we were not even covering these anymore. On the other hand, the critics saying they can't keep on the schedule, you know, they can't seem to make this thing come up to expectations as they had hoped. How do you view all these messages coming at the public? What are they to make of all of this?
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of people tend to use a situation like this as a platform to be heard, to air some of their own thoughts and considerations and some of their own, perhaps, special interest. The history of the shuttle program, the history of the entire space program has been very well thought out. It's been fraught with disaster to some degree where we've lost lives in the past. You know, you pay as you go to generate a program that has brought this country and this nation, the world for that matter, as much as the development and exploration of space has. You've got to be willing to pay the price as you go. That's going to continue to be the case. The shuttle is not yet an airliner. Even airliners today have been flying for 50, 60, 70 years, do have their problems. What does the word routine mean? Does it mean we go up without concern or without cause? No, I don't think that'll ever be the case.
Realistically, Gene, when do you think another shuttle might fly? I know you don't know, nobody knows, but give us an idea.
Well, David, it's certainly safe to say I think it's going to be at least a full year, maybe as much as 2. This problem will be thought out very thoroughly. I know the manner in which NASA acts. I know the people that are back there. We'll put 3, 4, 5, 7 men again and again and again on a shuttle as we go into the turn of the century. We'll look back at this as a major milestone in allowing us to do that. You know, David, I've thought a lot about this and been able to reflect a great deal in the last 24 hours. And you and I have talked about it. We are a generation that has inherited space. We've inherited the opportunities and the challenges that go with it. And we must be willing to pay the price for those opportunities. We have in the past, and I happen to firmly believe that this nation is ready and has enough resolve to do so in the future.
As sad as it is.
As sad as it might be.
Gene, thank you. And we'll be back in just a moment, 12 after.
It is now 14 minutes after, and with us now in Concord, New Hampshire is Marilyn Monahan, an eyewitness to yesterday's space shuttle tragedy. She watched the launch from the same bleachers at Cape Canaveral that held the friends and families of the astronauts. Marilyn is a 6th grade teacher from Manchester, New Hampshire, and president of the state chapter of the National Education Association, the NEA. And good morning, Marilyn.
Good morning, Joan.
You were standing with who there at the launch?
I was standing with a number of teachers that were down from New Hampshire, right next to all of the teachers that were the finalists throughout the country to my right, and to the left were the 3rd grade students that were down to witness this launch.
And those were the students from Scott McAuliffe's 3rd grade class, I know.
That's correct.
What did you see and what did you hear?
Well, we positioned ourselves very carefully so that we could see both the countdown board and also the launch, the rocket itself off to the left. And we were excited when the launch down count went below 9, since that's what it had been held at for so long. And there were cheers to our right as we screamed, give me a C, give me an H, give me an R, and we spelled Krista and yelled for teachers. And then suddenly the countdown kept going, and it was finally at 0, and we had a liftoff. And there was just incredible excitement to see that liftoff. The Challenger veered to the right, and a great cloud of white smoke just enveloped the area. It was white trail of smoke from the Earth right to the heavens. And then suddenly the second happening where the 2 rockets were to disengage from the Challenger occurred. They went off to either side, and suddenly we heard that there was a major malfunction and a silence fell over, or there were screams. And then they announced that there had been an explosion, and stunned silence and disbelief just engulfed all of us.
I know that Krista's parents, the Corrigans, were also there in that area. Did you look for them?
I did, because I had just been speaking to them about 15 minutes before the countdown resumed, and I saw where they were and had been talking with them, as I said before, and they're just such warm couple that you felt you had known them all your life. And so I looked for them, and I looked for the children in just hopes to make sure everyone was in some way attempting to grapple with this.
What message do you think that the teachers who were there yesterday with you will be taking back into their classrooms today to help the children deal and just the message about the space program?
Well, undoubtedly there was sorrow in every classroom in America yesterday, and certainly in the homes of all the teachers across this land. And I think they will be there today, as they were yesterday, trying to help the youngsters understand that sometimes in the midst of a beautiful dream, we have to deal with horrible nightmares. And they'll talk to them with it, and they'll give them hope, and they'll bring the message of Krista of Reach for the Stars that she signed so often in autographs in this state. And I think they'll work with the youngsters in whatever way they can to help them try to understand this, although even to adults it seems almost incomprehensible.
And I know you're standing there in front of the school this morning where all of that is going to be going on and where counselors are being brought in to help the children deal with their grief and their shock. We thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And right now, Jane Close Connolly is with us. She is a professor of educational psychology at the University of Nebraska. She is familiar with how children and adults respond to grief, and she's here to tell us what we might expect from our children and even ourselves, really, as we come to terms with the tragedy of the Challenger. And it's nice to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So many children across the country really got involved in this. Many of them have been studying all about space and about the shuttle for months now, and many of them watched that liftoff. What might be the typical responses that we as parents should expect, and even from different age groups?
Mm-hmm. I think that the different age groups is an important thing to keep in mind. This situation, the children are closer to it than many other tragedies. The teachers there, many were watching. Young children especially experience death as fear. Can it happen to me? They don't have that line between what's out there and what's next to them. So we might see young children who are particularly sensitive to it for whatever reason, stomach aches, nightmares, might want to sit closer to mom and dad, get up at night, make sure they're there. As they get a little older, I think we see other things in children. And I noticed with Mrs. McAuliffe's high school class, I think they're, especially with adolescents, they're struggling themselves with the meaning of life. And I saw their faces on the tape And I think they think a lot about death, and the question is life meaningful? What is this, how do I make sense of it? So I would see them really reflecting a lot and being very troubled.
Might a parent with a very small child, one through 3 grades, even see a totally opposite reaction and not see grief?
Absolutely. I've already heard from my home and calling my children that children, in dealing with the anxiety they feel, they don't understand death, so they do feel anxious about it, may say real dumb, obnoxious, mean things. Oh, that was funny to see it blow up, or oh, I'm glad a teacher got killed. And
so parents should understand where that's coming from and realize that there's anxiety. And
yeah, it's not something to punish a child about. It's something to say, that's not what I would say about that. I would say something different, and give them a model of how to talk about it.
All right, in President Reagan's speech to the nation yesterday, he had some very specific things to say to children, and here's a bit of what he said.
I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
What might we as parents say to our children to help?
I think, in keeping with the spirit of Mrs. McCullough, we should see this as a teachable moment for children, and bring it up and say.
Do bring it up.
Do bring it up, and bring it up in the context of, to my child, I would say, I was really upset by this. This is so sad to see this happen. Give them a forum, give them a possibility to talk about their feelings, not to suggest it, and not be upset if they don't respond to us, but to talk about it, to make the crisis a time where a family can discuss what is a really important part of life, and is real mysterious, though, for children.
Parents have probably heard this before, but we'll say it again. You should never equate death to going to sleep.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. And if they have another belief system, if they can talk about death in the context of their religion, that's very comforting for a child. If they can, I think they should be aware what children want are concrete examples about, are they still safe? Is mom still safe? Is dad still safe? And so if mom can say, I take, I don't go out at night and I buckle up the seatbelt and I do concrete things to keep myself safe, and here's what I do to keep you safe. Children worry about sometimes the small aspects of death, because that's what they can understand, and when we're talking about up to 3rd grade.
And teachers are being advised to also bring it up in class today and talk about it?
I think that's a real good thing. Now, not every teacher will be as comfortable, but most schools have school psychologists available to them and counselors, and if a teacher's not comfortable, to go in and talk it over with those people and get herself or get himself comfortable with it and bring it up. The most typical adult reaction to death is to hide it from children, and that can make it even scarier.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome.
We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
That, of course, the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, from which Challenger lifted off yesterday. And this morning, for 2 hours here on Good Morning America, we're remembering the 7 heroes who flew on Challenger. I'm David Hartman with Joan London. James Michener, one of our best-known authors, when he writes a novel, as we've all learned over the many years, he gets himself so totally into his subjects, and then he takes us with him there. One of his many bestsellers was called Space. And in a few minutes, James Michener will share with us his feelings about the 7 people whose personal dreams were shattered by that explosion yesterday.
And the American journey into space has been a real national adventure, but that doesn't mean that there's never been anything controversial about it. In this half hour, we will meet 2 reporters, veterans of the NASA years. And right now, though, it is 8:31, and Steve Bell has the news for us. Steve?
Thank you, Joan. Good morning, everyone. NASA investigating teams have begun searching for the clues that will tell us what happened to the Space Shuttle Challenger to blow it apart. The experts will depend primarily on technical data to analyze the nation's worst.
There's practically nothing else to talk about.
I couldn't believe it, I must say. It is saddening, especially to see it live, to see it so spectacularly.
Really a very shocking experience for the whole of humanity, I think.
The International Herald Tribune, which is published in most European cities and the Far East, gave the story one of its largest headlines ever. The so-called popular press of Britain, which is routinely sensational, competed with one another for the most dramatic, eye-catching account. The so-called serious papers, like The Guardian, claim that the future of America's ambitious space shuttle program is in complete turmoil. And the Financial Times predicts that the space program will be set back for years with a de-emphasis on humans in space. But not all of Europe feels that way. I spoke with German astronaut Ernst Messerschmitt, who last year had flown on the ill-fated Challenger.
Whenever the shuttle is ready again, I think any one of the trained astronauts would be ready to fly.
In the Soviet Union, there's been no official reaction from the Kremlin, although Soviet television has carried that videotape 38 minutes into its newscast last night. Soviet radio this morning used it as its 12th item. Most of the papers in Moscow carried it as a brief item on the inside pages with no political comment. However, in Poland, state-controlled television said that this is an example of the dangers of the U.S. so-called Star Wars program. Steve?
Mike, what about the European reaction from the standpoint of participation in the U.S. space program?
Despite that vote of confidence from astronaut Messerschmitt, the German Ministry of Science announced this morning that it has canceled or postponed advertising for 6 new astronauts who would have been trained for space missions with NASA later this year. Nonetheless, British astronaut Nigel Wood says he intends to go ahead for training and will show up at NASA headquarters in the near future. And Margaret Thatcher has said this morning in London that this points up that sometimes demands sacrifice, this sort of thing demands the sacrifice of the bravest and the best. Steve?
Mike Lee in London, thank you. That's our news for this morning. David?
Thanks, Steve. 25 before 9, weather with Dave Murray right after this. 25 minutes before 9.
Hello, everyone. Cold weather was certainly the rule over the eastern U.S. yesterday, but it was really cold down in Florida. Some of the coldest readings in years, from Tallahassee to Orlando, all the way down to Fort Myers and Miami. Now, it is cold again this morning, but by the afternoon, you bounce back into the 60s. Weather for this afternoon, plenty of sunshine all along the south, though along the west coast, a lot of cool air coming in. That's going to trigger some rain and periods of gusty winds. And in the northeast, a fast-moving Alberta Clipper is going to bring a little bit of snow your way. On the average, about 1 to 3 inches, but enough to slow you down. That's a look at the national weather. Now here's what you can expect.
Today will be a cloudy day, and we look for a little bit of snow, perhaps an inch or so. And after an overnight low of 14, we're looking for a high in the mid to upper 20s today. That snow will end overnight. It'll be cloudy, mid-teens to near 20. And tomorrow, clearing up and low to mid-30s.
That's our Wednesday weather report. David?
Thank you, Dave. 23 minutes before 9, Concord, New Hampshire. The people of the city in mourning after this.
It is now 8:39. As a nation, we have all been struck by the enormous tragedy of yesterday's shuttle disaster. But nowhere was that grief more concentrated than in Krista McAuliffe's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire. And last night, Steve Fox was in Concord.
Concord last night was a city in mourning. You could see it everywhere. The state capitol flag flying at half-mast. The downtown businesses, which had closed moments after the explosion. The silent, empty streets. The stunned, shaken people.
We lit a candle at work today. No one said anything to one another. And we just lit a candle and got on our knees and prayed.
It's a shock. It's unbelievable, probably because it wasn't an instant thing. It just happened and no one really knew whether she was gone or not.
Right up until liftoff on Tuesday, plans were still being made for a triumphant homecoming parade through the streets of Concord, and many store windows carried banners and signs reading things like, "Go, Lady, go." Last night, they were gone, and all that remained were memories of the school teacher who dared to reach for the stars.
I just want to let people know throughout this country that Concord, New Hampshire was extremely proud of Krista McAuliffe and feels a deep sense of loss.
Concord has lost a great person. The nation has lost a great person.
What we found in Concord was a city in a state of shock. People struggling to come to grips with an unspeakable tragedy, trying to put it into words that made sense. A poem written by the 11-year-old daughter of a former mayor. The thoughts of Krista's former students. The eulogy of her family's parish priest.
They have showed us what an American can do. They have showed us how an American can dare and dream.
You taught us so much, and you were loved. We long to shake your hand, but the chance is gone. We saw the explosion, we cried our tears. We thank her for her braveness and for forgetting her fears.
She was a wonderful person. She was great. Positive. Good person.
We miss her?
A lot. Everyone will.
And of course, the entire nation does share in Concord's grief. David?
Thank you, Joan. It's almost 18 minutes before 9 right now. Two veteran reporters are joining us this morning with a different view of all of this, their reactions to this tragedy. Bill Hines is Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. He's covered the space program since 1957. He joins us from KTRK in Houston. Wayne Biddle is a former reporter for the New York Times who now writes about technology for Discover magazine, and he's in Washington. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Bill, you've covered this 30 years of covering the space program. What was your personal reaction yesterday when you saw this?
One of shock. As it turned out, I was covering the Voyager mission to Uranus in Pasadena, California, and I walked into the Jet Propulsion Laboratory auditorium where the press room was established no more than 10 seconds before this happened, and I was watching maybe my 40th or 50th launch as far as I was concerned, and all of a sudden this fireball. Well, there goes the ball game.
You know, we've been trying to talk this morning about these people involved, the people who are personally involved, who dedicate themselves to doing this kind of work, even though they know that the dangers, the risks are there. I understand you know Judy Resnick and knew Judy Resnick well. What was her feeling and sense and feel about what she was doing with her life?
She said it many times, and I recall one time she told me that she wanted to spend the rest of her life in the space program, and tragically she did.
Wayne, you know, there are those this morning we've spoken with, astronauts, people who have been involved in space for many, many years and flying, who have said this kind of thing was inevitable, essentially. It was bound to happen sometime, no matter how many safety systems, no matter how good the technology. If you take something up there, eventually something's going to happen. What's your feel about that?
Well, our first reaction has to be remorse for the family tragedy involved here. But from an engineering perspective, my reaction has been comparable to in the aftermath of the 3 Mile Island accident in the nuclear power industry. That led to a fundamental reassessment by engineers and by the American public of the risks that are assumed with technologies as complicated as the space shuttle.
Wayne, what do you think the effect will be? Gene Cernan said a while ago he expects that it'll be at least a year, maybe more, although he doesn't have much more information or any more than we do at this point. What do you think the effect will be on the shuttle program?
It's clearly a cataclysmic setback for the program. I must say that I'm appalled to hear some of the reactions by politicians in the past 12 or 14 hours, a sort of cowboy attitude of, well, we've got to get back on this horse and ride it around again. I think that's exactly the kind of attitude that led NASA to take the sort of publicity stunt of putting members of Congress responsible for its budget, journalists and school teachers on a very dangerous machine.
Bill, what's your view about the program continuing on? What do you think might happen here or should happen?
Well, I agree with Gene Cernan, who was on earlier, that there's going to be 1 to 2 years, I say at least 2 years before this thing flies again. But just to follow on with something that Wayne said, Senator Garn of Utah was on here not very long ago explaining how sorry he was that all this had happened. And I would submit that if Senator Garn hadn't wanted to take a junket of unprecedented scope last April, that one of these people, Gregory Jarvis, would be alive today. Gregory Jarvis was bounced off the April flight to accommodate this man on a junket. And I said at the time editorially in my newspaper, why is it that the sanitation commissioner of the city of Chicago never wants to take a ride on a garbage truck?
Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us this morning from Houston and Washington. Thank you. And we'll be back 14-0. Gene Cernan after this.
It is now 48 after. Gene Cernan's experience in space includes some of the most successful American flights, including the last moon landing in 1972. He became an astronaut in 1963. He was part of the space program during its only previous fatal accident, the deaths of 3 astronauts whose capsule burned on the ground 19 years ago this week. And Gene Cernan joins us now from KTRK TV in Houston. And good morning, Gene.
Good morning, Joan.
Thinking back to that fatal fire back in 1967, Roger Chaffee was aboard. He was more than just another astronaut to you. He was a close friend. He was a neighbor. He was a college classmate. You were there with his wife to help her through that tough time. Just how much do astronauts and their families think about the possibility of the death and the risk involved, and how do they manage to make it through these disasters?
With a great deal of difficulty, Joan. I have thought back about that day, 19 years ago, almost to the day. You know, the program was younger than it is today. Each flight was somewhat of a new challenge, and certainly different. There were fewer of us in a program, and I think we all were willing to acknowledge privately, at least to ourselves, that tragedy was certainly in a wing somewhere. The possibility of it was, but we never acknowledged it publicly, even to each other, even in our homes. Even though we knew it might be there, it might come someday, possibly to one of us personally, if not to our friends. It didn't make it any easier when it happened. You never really were prepared. We weren't for what happened 19 years ago during that fire.
And after so much success now, you almost, it seems like a lot of us, from our point of view, we forget that there is that element of risk there. But I don't know, how about the astronauts?
Well, you know, we talk about the bravery of the guys or the gals who go into space, but the guys and the gals who stay home, the old ones and the young ones, they deserve a lot of credit. I think one thing that I remember very vividly was something that was said that came home very close to me. If you think it's difficult going to the moon, you ought to try staying home. And I do indeed believe those words are a tribute to the men and the women, the wives, the husbands, and certainly the children who do have to stay at home while we go out and have a good time. It's not quite that simple, but that's what it amounts to.
Well, it is all those people that we were all thinking about this morning. We sure thank you for being with us throughout the morning.
Well, they that are home today, those who didn't reach for the stars personally, but who send their loved ones to do so, are the people who we ought to acknowledge as great contributors to the space program, not only in the past, but certainly in the future and the days to come.
You bet. Gene, thank you. And we'll be back. James Michener coming up.
Ever since he was a child, James Michener has been interested in almost everything. We, of course, know him best as a novelist. In '79, he was invited to serve on the advisory council to NASA, wrote a novel called Space. It was a bestseller in a TV miniseries, and Jim Michener knows the space program and the people of the space program, and he joins us from KVUE-TV in Austin this morning. Jim, good morning.
Good morning.
What was your reaction to what happened here yesterday, Jim?
I was thrown into shock. Our nation is engaged and has been for some time in one of the great experiments of the world. We've had unlimited success up until yesterday, and then this explosive tragedy. I think it's proper that we review where we are and where we're going. It would be terribly improper to panic. All of the experience we've had, this is a time of national testing, national grief, national sorrow, reevaluation. I think it's proper that we go through this experience.
How do you describe, Jim, the qualities of the people both who go into space and those who are close to those who go into space?
I've known a good many of the astronauts, and they are superior people. They have very good reflexes. Their eyes are bright. They have good vocabularies. These are some of the finest people our society is throwing forward, and they have served us very well. There's never been a scandal in the space program. These kids wouldn't allow it. So we're talking about inherently able people. They're not super gods or anything like that, but they sure are good. And I've seen them in good times and bad, and I'm extremely proud of them. I have felt in my duty with NASA as part of their team, and I could not be more proud of fellow teammates than I am of the people who have served NASA.
What does the term bravery, do you think, mean to them?
Oh, I think a sensible person makes the facing of danger a routine. I've seen a great deal of danger for other people in the work I've done in the wars and the travels and the revolutions and space, aviation. I think you routinize it. You say, this goes with the job, and you don't cry baby about it. I have never in all of my life, David, with space and aviation, heard anybody say, I'm afraid of this or I'm aware of great danger. You don't do that. You say, this is my job, I elected it, I want to be here, I'll take the whole mix.
James Michener, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us this morning and sharing with us.
Good to be here with you, sir.
Thank you. We'll be back.
It has been the kind of morning that we all hoped we would never have, reporting on a tragedy in America's space shuttle program. Tomorrow, of course, we'll bring you whatever new information we have.
And with all of you in America and around the world, our thoughts and our prayers are with the astronauts, their families, their friends, their colleagues, their students.